And I want to thank each and every one of you from the bottom of my heart for coming to this important occasion. I've known Ashley, very brilliant person, I might add, and I think it's a gift that she's giving to all of us. And as I had indicated, the purpose of SDIG is to create a forum for everyone, regardless of the person's perspective, belief, to be able to air that belief. The third president of the United States, Thomas Jefferson, indicated that he would not work against his enemy from expressing his or her view. And that's the position we have at the SDIG. So it's with great pleasure that I welcome all of you. And I'm gonna be transferring to our able educational leader, David Rowell, who is gonna be talking about what we do here more, and then introduce our honorable guest here, Dr. Fowlkes. So David, would you take it away, please?
Yes, my pleasure. This is a great coming together of two organizations that are all about serving people through raising awareness of issues that affect people. And so our missions very much coincide with each other. And so it's almost natural that we host these type of events on a recurring basis together. I have to say that I am the educational director and the external affairs director for SDIG, but I'm also a Fowlkes associate consultant. So I get the pleasure of working with both of these wonderful groups of people. I know I'm going to turn it over to Ashley in a few moments, and he's going to introduce the rest of the consultants and the panel and the topic for this evening. But I just want to say again that being in a position where I get to see both groups operate is an honor indeed, in that I can see the great things that are being done by both. If you're interested in SDIG, by all means, follow us on LinkedIn. If you're interested in the work we do here at Fowlkes Consulting, by all means, Ashley will speak to that and contact any of us consultants. And that being said, I'm going to turn it over to our very esteemed and very astute leader, Ashley Fowlkes. Thank you, Ashley.
All right. Thank you so much, David. So I'm really excited about this collaboration, I think SDIG and Fowlkes Consulting, and us getting together to do the first of what will be an ongoing series called Fowlkes and Friends. And I'm really, really excited about that. What we'll be doing is we will be getting Fowlkes consultants together, and we'll also be bringing in esteemed colleagues to have some really important conversations with us on some really important topics. And so tonight is the first night that we're doing this. It's super exciting. And as David kind of alluded to, we're going to be discussing something really interesting. So tonight's topic is queer as folks. It's a bit of a play on words. I don't know if you've ever watched the television program. I cannot take credit for how witty it is. It was actually Courtney Frierson who made the suggestion. So shout out to Courtney. But yeah, queer as folks is what the topic is tonight. We're going to be discussing queer identity and the ins and outs of that, what that means to us individually, collectively, and where we see the future of queer identification going. And so that is the topic that we're going to be discussing. And let me introduce the two amazing guests that we have, and then we will talk about the panel of consultants that we have. So I'd like to introduce Courtney Frierson. She is an amazing mental health clinician based out of Little Rock, Arkansas. She is, I assume, okay with me sharing the fact that she identifies as queer, which is one of the reasons that I reached out to her in particular, because she can speak to this from both a personal perspective and also from a professional perspective, she's someone who I trust dearly and admire a great deal. And I'm super excited that she's here with us today. Thank you so much, Courtney, for sharing your time with us. We also have as a guest panelist tonight, Chastity Chandler, who is an amazing clinician out of Florida. And she actually does a lot of work with the LGBTQ community. And so she's someone that I tapped as a resource for this conversation because she works so closely with the LGBTQ community and can speak to this in terms of identity, professional identity, and mental health. And so I'm super excited to have both of these phenomenal contributors on here tonight. And then let me introduce the folks consultants. Drum roll, please. So you've already met David. David is one of our esteemed consultants. He's amazing. He is an expert on gender parity, and we love him for it. He brings that to the table each and every day. We've got Robert Robinson, who is amazing, and he's an expert on microaggressions and how to thwart those in the workplace. So we're glad to have Robert on here today. We've got Doug, who is an expert in LGBT marketing. Super excited to have Doug on here. He knows all things gay marketing. So great to have you, Doug. We've got Kaylin. Welcome back, Kaylin, who's been away a little bit. Kaylin is our resident faith expert. She has an amazing personal story about accepting and loving, her son, who identifies as gay, and she works a lot with faith organizations who are trying to figure out how to reconcile faith with queer identity. And last but not least, we have Chanel, who came on board to help in time of need, because I was really struggling with how to make all of this work and how to pull everything together. And Chanel stepped in. She is also an amazing clinician based out of San Diego, California. And she stepped in to save the day and to keep us afloat and to get us on the right track. And so I am forever indebted to her for that. All right, so I am ready. If you guys are ready to hop into this discussion. Were you about to say something, David?
No, I'm just eager to get going. That's all.
Okay. So I'm ready to jump into this discussion, you guys. The way that this is going to work is feel free to hop in at any time. If you've got a question, feel free to, however you would like to make it known to us. Just full disclosure, I don't always see when people do the raised hand function thing. So please feel free to just jump on in there and say, hey, I have a thought, and to chime in. We'd love to hear your thoughts. If you have a question, we'd love to hear your questions. This is going to go pretty organically in terms of we'll let people answer as they feel comfortable. Having said that, if I pose a question and no one speaks up right away, if you are one of my consultants, I might tap you at any time and put you on the spot. So let me let you know that in advance. And I would be what kind of host if I didn't say that also to our guests? So if I ask a question and no one says anything, I might tap you, Courtney or Chastity. So you have now been warned. All right, so let's go. Let's get started. I'm excited. Very first question. Queer means many things for many people. What does queer mean to you? Anyone can jump in. Jump in.
This part where you tap somebody, actually. I think it's a very good question. I'm not going to give an answer per se. I just want to open it up by saying it's not only a very good question, a very relevant question, because sometimes I think it's these definitions that trip people up more than anything. And we might think it's a quick part of an acronym to say that Q is for queer, but there's so much more underneath it in terms of nuances, and it can mean different things to different folks. So I play on words. I'll just open it by saying a lot of the reading I've done, and I know this differs from some of the other consultants that will weigh in as well, that that a large part of the community has kind of taken back that name, taken it from a pejorative to being something more celebratory, being a point of pride, that this queer, I mean, by definition, just means unusual, but unusual can also mean exceptional, right? So maybe that's another way to look at it. So really it's just, maybe it just, to me, it just kind of means it's not necessarily common, actually. So I'll leave it at that and let the others weigh in.
Anyone want to add to that?
This is Kaylin. Can you hear me?
Yes, Caitlin.
Wonderful. So I have one of my previous clients who is an amazing, amazing woman. She identifies as queer, and this was her definition that she gave to me. She said that for her, she is attracted to the heart of a person, not their gender, not their set, or not their sex, not anything, but just what their heart shines through. And for her, it could be male or female. It could be someone who's transgender. She's actually engaged to a wonderful transgender man. And they just bought a house down in Florida. But for her, it was just really about the beautiful attraction of the person's heart. And that's for her what she identifies for her as being queer. So that's my little bit of input.
That's beautiful, Kaylin. Awesome.
If I may chime in, the last speaker, Kellen, thank you so much. I love your description of what it means. And for me, I think I don't know too much about the word, and to be very frank with you, I've never checked it to know what it means. So if I come across as someone who doesn't know, bear with me. I'm particularly heartened that the way Dr. Fowlkes began by trying to define it, because oftentimes, depending on our locations, our situations, our environments, we concoct idea of whatever name we hear or title we hear and use that to make judgment. And I would say from my experience, when people use that word, they don't use it in good way. It's like when certain people talk about Black, they don't mean it in good way. Some people will lie about it, but the fact is that people cultivate some rubbish that may not reflect anything, depending on their location and the environment, and use it to describe people, use it to determine how they deal with people. So I'm particularly pleased that you began how you began, and people need to really learn. Hopefully, we all learn what something means before we sort of begin to label people, which is very common based on my experience.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Chastity had something to add.
Yes. Let's tap Chastity.
I just wanted to add, I am noticing an influx of the use of the word, kind of almost like a reclaiming in Black and Brown communities. It's kind of almost like, I'm not going to fit into a box. You're not going to put me into a box. I am who I am. And it's a very prideful and a very positive thing. So this is what I'm seeing both in my practice and amongst my peers. I'm actually a certified sex therapist. And in the sexuality professional world, a lot of us individuals who do this work identify as queer, or that seems to be like the best fitting thing. So that's what I've seen an influx on, is a reclaiming of the word in a more positive and prideful way, and just kind of a resistance to being stuck in a box or to be one of the regular checkbox.
For me, I really see a huge generational assignment with the word queer in terms of marketing. For sure, somebody my age, about 119, it was always sort of used pejoratively, and we would avoid using it. And a lot of brands won't use the word queer. They will have no problem using the Q in LGBTQ, but they won't come up with a specific messaging or experiential program around the word queer. And it's only in the last few years, as Chastity just said, that I've noticed that there is this taking back, reclaiming, and trying to really highlight queer as a community. As marketers, we sort of struggle between how we market to gay people and lesbian people as opposed to queer people. But I do notice that you are right. There is a claiming, and it's really this creation of an actual community of people who identify as queer proudly.
Well, and I think that that's an excellent and very important point. You know, one of the things I get asked a lot when I do presentations is, you know, why so many labels? Why so many labels? What's up with all the labels? And I think you just hit the nail on the head, Doug, when you talk about, you know, community. You know, one of the things that labels do provide us is a sense of belonging and a sense of community, and knowing that you're not the only person like this, or the only person that identifies in this way, or in this case, maybe the only person that doesn't identify with the majority. And so I think it's super, super important that we take the time to actually identify what these things mean, and then we create space for people to identify themselves in that way. I cannot let this question go by without tapping Courtney Frierson. Courtney, you got to talk to us on this one.
Yeah, just acknowledging that my answer and my identity is also couched in layers of intersectional privilege. You know, to me, the importance of queerness is that it's markedly non-assimilationist and really celebrating difference. And so, you know, a gay person could want the exact same thing as a straight person, and they just happen to be in a relationship with a same-sex person. They want the white picket fence, they want, you know, 1.2 kids, whatever it is, you know, it's kind of like follows the same heteronormative trajectory. And queer to me is definitely not that. And then followed by self-definition is what I think is really important, and really embracing having relationships and having the potential of relationships and attraction with multiple people. And so that for me is what's really important, and what's really different is that it's specifically political, and it's also specifically non-assimilationist.
Wonderful. So let's talk a little bit about kind of this generational divide that Doug brought up.
Folks, I'm sorry. I think it's Molly.
Mainly, thank you.
Sorry, it's been trying to chime in.
Oh,
Yeah,
please
thank you for your.
So sorry.
Okay, please.
No, you go ahead.
Okay, me. So hi, my name is Maylee, and I have a bunny in my. Thank you, Layla. Dr. Fowlkes and I are connected on LinkedIn, but we don't know each other. So I thought I'd tune in and thank you for sharing this event. I'm glad to join while my baby is nursing and before we go to dinner. So I just thought I'd say hello. But in response to your question, you know, I don't know that I could put my finger on it. What is queer, right? And you're asking this question, and then I'm thinking about what people are saying. And I'm thinking, well, maybe that's the point. Right? Is that it's not supposed to be one particular thing. There is room to be, right? Who you are and explore that. Because I would feel ill-equipped to give some kind of definition of. I think that maybe defeats the purpose. Thanks for asking the question. And I hope to be in touch after we drop off for dinner.
Yes, no, I think you're absolutely right. And I think it's so nuanced that if anything, all of these perspectives kind of add value, but it's definitely one of those things where we could never, I think, fully define it. So thank you for that input. And it's nice to meet you.
Thank you, likewise.
So can we talk a little bit about connotation and whether in your experience, the connotation is positive or negative? And we recognize that there's a generational divide like Doug was talking about. But, you know, there's the reclamation of the word, right? And people deciding that it's going to be a positive thing, like Chastity was referencing. And then there's people that feel like there's nothing that you could possibly do to make this a positive term. And so I really would love to hear from Robert about the generational divide and, you know, your experience with the word queer and how you feel about the reclaiming of that word.
All right, so to preface that, so in the 25 years of being a corporate consultant, I've taught every generation from, let's see, pre-baby boomers, which would be the greatest generation, I suppose, that were 70 years old when I was 33 starting out. And also, as an educator for 38 years, I've taught every generation, if you will, from my own, which is the tail end of the baby boomers and Gen X, all the way to Gen Z. So yes, it is generational. It's also, in my opinion, it's also regional, what it means to be queer. I was queer in Alabama because I didn't wear overalls in a coal mining community, and I had the crap beaten out of me because I wore khakis, a button down, and penny loafers. And that's the truth. And so the ownership of the word can be connotative, and it definitely can be pejorative. And I grew up in the civil rights era of Birmingham in the 60s. So anybody that didn't fit the rough, white privilege, white supremacist mode, you know, took a pretty hard blow. And I have the scars to prove it, both mental and physical. So yes, so it carries those connotations. And with those connotations from my generation all the way through Gen Z, there are triggers associated with it. Based on the schools where I taught from high school to college, and where I served as an administrator at the alternative school, where 97% were Black males from 6th grade to 12th grade, who were one step in or out of YDC into the prison system, and certainly in the foster system, queer had a negative connotation. And it wasn't to be lauded or praised in any way. And it was a structured society. And as a quick anecdote, there was a boy who was sent to school at the alternative school because he was deemed disruptive. And he was a young Black middle school male who wore a wig. And for those of you that know, it was a bob. It was just a short, straight Black bob. But he was deemed disruptive by his Black female principal because he was wearing that wig. And my argument as the administrator in accepting him at the school was, well, do you suspend the females who wear wigs for being disruptive? And of course, the answer was no. But so the root cause of him being disruptive was that he fought back when he was being bullied and called queer and fag and all of the other derogatory terms. Yet he stayed. He had to spend the whole year at the alternative school. And so, you know, I found that viciously unfair and prejudicial, both on the part of the administration and the school system. So anecdotally, there are multiple incidents in my career spanning 38 years as an educator and my 25 years as to what the connotations of queer means. And one of the later questions that I posed, is it a regional construct? Because in Alabama, a surfer dude from California would be deemed queer. You take a kid out of New York City in the School of the Arts and NYU, he would be considered average and normal if he wore eyeliner, for example. But in Alabama, that's pretty much a death sentence or a guaranteed kick me sign on the back. And I could go on forever. So I'll just pause right there and see if anybody has any comments or questions at this point.
So I'd like to continue the conversation about it as a regional construct. Like, I think that that's a really interesting idea. And I'm interested to know, David, what your thoughts are on queer as a regional construct.
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, to be honest, Ashley, I really think I don't have the experience necessarily in the South. I can tell you I've lived in the Midwest and the West some, but the Southeast, I I'll let Robert speak to that again. My experience with the term, I think in my experience, honestly, it's more not the region that I've experienced different in, rather the population center. If I'm in a big city, like I spent a lot of time in Kansas City or in Dallas or in Austin, these places, I think the term is much more open, and is open amongst young, as we just talked. But if you get out away from the city in those places in the Midwest, then it does have that more negative connotation. And so I don't know about the regional aspect, but I can tell you it certainly would be viewed differently in a metropolitan area than it would be in a rural area. So that's what I've seen more difference. But again, I'll let Robert attest to the Southeast because I haven't spent a lot of time there.
This is Kaylin. And I'm going to agree with what David said. I live in Omaha, and Omaha, believe it or not, is actually a big city for the Midwest. And you go just across the river into Council Bluffs, and you go maybe, I don't know, 30 minutes out, you're in farm country. And I have had personal experience with individuals who are LGBTQ who they come to Omaha because they're accepted. They come to the big city because there's more understanding. But back home on the farm, oh, no, we don't talk about that. It's just not acceptable. And so I think this is my own thought process. I kind of feel that in a bigger city, there's more open-mindedness. People are more willing to look outside of their own self, look outside of the box. Granted, it's also going to be, I do believe, regional too. I think the coasts have more openness than the middle of the country. But when you go into Chicago, into Dallas, into Denver, into Kansas City, these more populated places, it's like, oh, hey, this is great. Welcome to our community. We're so happy you're here. But in the more rural parts, they stick to grassroots for what they know. This is how America was born and raised, and this is what we keep it as. And to look outside of anything beyond that is really hard. So that's just what I've experienced literally living in the heartland. So my 2 pits.
Absolutely. Doug, I think you were about to say something.
Well, my question was, if you're parsing out queer, if we're parsing out the Q from the L, the G.
Having difficulty hearing you, Doug.
Oh, is this any better?
Having a hard time hearing you, Doug. I'm not sure.
Can you hear me? If I take out my.
Yes. There we go.
What I was going to say is, my question is, if we're parsing out the Q from LGBTQIA2S plus on and on, is being queer and what people perceive as queer different regionally? I think that's certainly a question that I have. Like, I live in West Hollywood, and what the queer community here is very vocal. And is it different from a queer community in Miami or Atlanta or Philadelphia or Omaha for that matter? But I do think we can all agree that certainly in major metropolitan areas, that the entire LGBTQ community is concentrated. But I think what I'm really curious about is the Q, is the queer, as opposed to just all things LGBTQIA2S plus.
I'll add that queer, as Courtney had said, is maybe being anti-assimilation and not fitting into a box, and people of a younger generation taking ownership of their own individual identity. One of the traits of Western culture in the US is that rugged individualism that we've all been trained about, the rootin' tootin' cowboy rugged individualism, if you will, but that has expanded to include queer people. However, there are triggers associated with it, with that label, just as there are triggers associated with the N-word, and who's allowed to say it, who's allowed to use it, in what tone of voice, in what context, around who, and toward whom, that makes it safe or unsafe. And even in metropolitan areas like Atlanta, as similar to what Kaylin said, you can go 4 blocks and say it out loud or hold hands, and you can, be beaten. And then 4 blocks later, you can be embraced. So, there are certain unspoken rules and zones around metropolitan Atlanta, just like there are in every metropolitan area where you go and don't go as a gay person or a Q person, that the danger zones, for example. Those are expanding. And with the political climate of the last 4 years, hate has certainly been given permission to expand all across the country. And so gay people or LGBTQ are all targets of that hate, just as we've seen a rise in Asian Pacific hate. And so to own it in a comfortable space, to say I'm queer and where you come out, is often a safety issue around the identity. In the university I teach is almost tied for the largest university in Georgia at 36,000 students. And they may be able, the Q crowd may be able to be comfortable on campus, on the quad, but 2 miles down the road is the Confederate Museum. And they're allowed to fly the Confederate flag 2 miles down the road. So anyway, again, distance, geography, regionalism, and where and how you say it and who it's directed toward and how it's received are all issues. And so I err on the side of caution, having had all these experiences. And for those of you that haven't heard me before, 5th grade was my first year of integration outside Birmingham. So I went through and witnessed it all and experienced a lot, not as bad as a gay Black friend of mine did, but we got it together. We were beaten for being friends with each other, because queer boys and N-word boys don't hang out together, and different things. So it's there, it's resurfaced. As we saw today I saw today on ABC News, crimes against Asians in New York City have increased 888%. So we keep that in mind, and we ask for our safety and other minorities' safety as we're on this journey to self-acceptance and self-awareness. And where do we fall in these categories?
Hey, Ashley, I may be jumping ahead, but I'd love to hear from our guests on the safety issue, because I think it's a very important topic. But where have they felt safe or not felt safe? And when do they feel safe enough to talk about being queer? And when would it be very unsafe to do so?
Courtney, what are your thoughts on that?
Many. It's interesting because my identity as queerness has been an evolution. And I think, one of the things I describe is that my sexuality is better described as a pie chart. Like there's not like a couple tidy boxes. It's like, if I look back in history at people I've been attracted to and pursued, there's a pie chart. And so when I think about when and how I use the word queer, especially to self-identify, part of that is in my own erasure, my own queer erasure, being married to a man. And so I'm married to a trans man. And so when I say, blah, 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 husband, I'm like, God, I've got this long hair, like I look basic. Everyone just thinks I'm like straight, heteronormative, all the whole things. And it's very important to me to not be that. And I've tried to release that need to over-explain to strangers, because it really doesn't matter how they perceive me, and as long as I'm safe enough. So it's like very invalidating to my partner to want to like assert my queerness, to be like, I'm not totally straight. It's a queer relationship. He's trans. Like, that's really invalidating him. I would never do that. So I just let people believe I'm straight, and I'm just like, whatever. And if it ever is relevant, and if he's given me permission to out him as a trans person, then I do under certain circumstances. But my being seen as queer is erased by being married to a man. So sometimes it is important for me to say that I'm queer, because I want people to know that, especially because I see a lot of trans and queer and gay clients in Little Rock, Arkansas. And I want to make sure people know that I'm the therapist that sees a lot of gay and trans clients. And so I don't want to be seen as like, oh, that helpful ally. That's like, I want to be like, no, I'm of the community, and I want to like let people know that. So it's really context based. We were up in rural Arkansas, in Mountain View, Arkansas this past weekend, just enjoying a little getaway in the mountains. And people up there know that they call us from off. You know, if you're from off, which means you're not from there. And we very much stand out as from off, because my partner is also Asian, and they don't have people of color in this town. And he's from that town. And so we would make sure not to use his debit card, because people would recognize his last name, and then they'd be like, but wait, so-and-so had like a girl child, and he very much presents masculine. So it's just unsafe. And so we're like very straight looking this weekend, just like, yep, that's us, just blending right in, nothing going on over here. But when it comes to professionalism, it is very important for me to out myself in professional settings when it's relevant. I think I said a lot just then.
I think I'm kind of opposite, right? I've always been this cisgender heterosexual female like my whole entire life, right? That's just who I've been, always been an ally, always. Basically, I dedicate my whole professional career to holding space and being affirming. And that's the whole point of me becoming a sex therapist, so that I could be more qualified to do the work with the LGBTQ plus population. I just kind of fell in love with the intersex condition and being in transgender when I was in my master's program. So I just did everything on that. That just was my passion. I was like, these are the people that need me. And now here I am later in life, and I am not seeing love as this heteronormative mono lens, right? So now I'm like polyamorous. I had a female partner, I have a trans partner. It's like all these changes. For me, that's been kind of very much the opposite. I felt like I had to fight to show that I wasn't just one of these closeted allies, right? I'm very outspoken. Like I get into it in Facebook groups, like I do marches, like I do the whole 9 every Pride Month type of a thing. And now it's like, no, I'm not just fighting for the community. Like I am a part of the community, but because I still identify as a cisgender heterosexual female, I find myself, and I'm also not one to do the whole box thing. I don't do it for my clients. I don't do it for me. I don't follow gender roles. I just kind of like break all the rules type of a thing. So for me, the only thing that would fit would be me calling and identifying as a queer person. I'm not a lesbian, right? I'm not bisexual. So none of the other sexuality identifiers actually fit for me. So now here I am, this very outspoken, very outgoing person. I don't really think I think about my safety. I'm kind of very professional, but I grew up in the hood. So you try me, it's on and popping type of thing, right? So I don't think about the safety aspect, but that is huge when I'm working with my clients. Like the safety aspect of it all is at the forefront. And so until you posed that question, David, I never thought about my safety. I never thought that my safety would be in danger or questioned, you know, because of who I love or how I show up in the world. It's just never been a thing. So.
Well, then I have another question.
Wait, can I have a comment before your question, David?
What's that?
Can I have a comment before your question?
Of course.
Okay, just in case the question takes us another direction. When we discuss safety, there's physical safety, right? Which is what I feel like we're kind of discussing right now. Perhaps even emotional safety. But I'm really interested to know, what are your thoughts on professional safety? And to what extent does queer identity impact your ability to move up the professional ladder? And I, from my own personal lived experience, like literally, I have had experiences where, my identity as trans male has stopped me from being able to have certain opportunities. It just has. There's no getting around it. And so when we're discussing safety, I kind of find myself thinking, okay, well, but how safe is it for you to be out as queer when you think about professional development and professional opportunities and moving up the corporate ladder or whatever that might look like for you? And so before we transition from safety, can we kind of talk about that and what it looks like in the professional world? And here at Fowlkes Consulting, we do a lot of work with large organizations, right? And one of the things that we discuss is how safe is it really to be LGBTQ within your organization? I mean, like every organization wants to say it's safe, but how safe is it really to be that? And so anyways, I'm interested to hear your thoughts or anyone in the group's thoughts on how queer identity affects the workplace, and then how also can we create space specifically in the workplace for people that identify as queer.
Robert has his hand raised.
So if I may jump in and stop me when you will, from education to corporate, it depends on a lot of human resource policies, and it also depends on how regional, how rural, or how metropolitan. However, my experience has been over, again, my 38-year career in education, is that people use it against you. If you're out and you identify as gay, people will pretend, heterosexuals will pretend to be accepting. And then when they want to bring you down for some reason, or you get a promotion, they'll attack you and they'll say, well, I heard he was queer and therefore not suitable for a leadership position because, as you know, all gays are emotional, for example, and weak like women. And you get those biases. And, as they say, you're not part of the good old boy system. In corporate, that tends to be true in regional companies as well, and how they use and view male leadership. The more heteronormative males in the company, for example, engineering companies where 80% or more are male and predominantly white, they tend to bring in their own and exclude all minorities, women, and people of color, as well as gays. And it's very rare. So it's not safe at all. And religious minorities. And as I've mentioned before, it even threatened to kill them in Tennessee, which I had that experience in 2016. So bring me back to focus, please, on what I was saying. How do people treat you? It's not safe in many cases in the workplace. You can be protected. The problem lies in that if human resources is on your side, it's good. If human resources are not on your side, then they play along with the system that's in place, if you will, the good old boy system or whatever system it is. For example, when someone threatened to kill a Black nuclear engineer at the engineering firm where I was facilitating diversity classes, I reported it to HR, and the HR representative said to me, this is 2016, well, Mr. Robinson, is this your first day teaching diversity? And I said, no, this is my 106th day teaching at your class, and I've been doing it for 25 years. So immediately, rather than finding out about the person who made the threat publicly in a room of 40 people, he wanted to bring down me because he was defending the perpetrator, the terrorist, if you will. And so those kind of things happen where HR will join in with that system and they will bring down that person. And that's unfortunate. And that's happened in more than one company. And that's where those big lawsuits come in, like Coca-Cola settling for $514 million, and where Southern Company settled for over $300 million for not promoting women and people of color. And, we have all these statistics. and where Texaco said the black jelly beans stick to the bottom of the pile and can never rise to leadership. You know, those kinds of things. So I've got thousands of those experiences as well. But back to Q, you know, you come out at your own risk, which is unfortunate. And according to HRC, this number may have changed, but 22 states do not protect LGBTQ from firing. And so you look at that, and so you can be fired. And in education in Georgia, if you say I am gay, you can be fired, public or private. And you can see all over the nation, if you read the HRC records and ACLU records, any private school or religious school can fire people for being gay as educators. So to that end, it's like, be out at your own risk. And I'm not in the closet. I survived it, but, you know, took, you know, a good deal of harassment for it at different times, as most recent as 2016 in education.
This is Chanel. Thank you, Robert. I wanted to just be mindful about the time, Dr. Fowlkes, but then also I wanted to comment on, you know, about safety regarding queerness. You know, I served in the military for several years, and I served under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And so it was a safety issue, but it also was like a career killer. If someone outed you to the command, if you somehow got found out or whatever, then you were kicked out of the military and you lose all your benefits, despite how good of a worker you were, how good of a sailor you were, a soldier. And so, you know, being a queer person at that time, I really struggled with being able to, you know, maintain my relationships as I rose up in ranks, because, you know, what happens if they found out that, you know, I had a girlfriend? And so safety is an issue. And so now, you know, fast forward, you know, they disband Don't Ask, Don't Tell, but even though they disband that rule, it doesn't change the fact that safety is still a big concern. And Courtney, you mentioned something that I like to call it the passing, right? Where you can kind of blend between two different places. So, you know, as a bisexual woman, when I was married to a heterosexual man, I automatically, you know, people just assumed that I was straight, they assumed that I was married, and that was my husband, and then I wasn't queer. And in some spaces, that was a protective kind of thing, right? But then in other spaces, you know, like my queerness definitely wasn't validated in the LGBT community, you know, because I was married to a heterosexual man. And so safety really, you know, plays a role when sometimes you can be out and sometimes you can't be out, and sometimes you can pass and sometimes you can't. And I think the passing piece is the piece that makes you be able to blur the line of safety, right? Like if you can pass as someone who appears cishet, then you are safe. And if you can't pass, then, you know, you can't. You can't. So like the masculine presenting women, you know, when I was in the military, and the effeminate men in the military were always the ones that were constantly being, you know, like harassed, or, you know, a lot of different harm was enacted towards them because they couldn't pass, right? And so I think it's something that we have to really think about when we think about safety, is because there are people who can stay in the middle of the spectrum and pass and hide from the harm. Not that they want to hide, but because they're able to, that's a privileged space that they're able to be in. Whereas other people, you know, who don't have that ability to pass, who maybe not even want to pass for that matter, right? Like they're automatically, their safety is put in jeopardy on all the different levels where we could think about safety, right? Where we think about safety in reference to jobs, safety in reference to physical safety, emotional safety, those types of things. So I definitely think in the corporate space, I think that it's an issue. You know, safety is definitely one of those things that you think about. And if I'm honest, I think that might have been one of the reasons why I went into private practice for myself and worked for myself, because I didn't have to deal with those issues. You know, like I make my own business, and that's a privilege that I have. I know everybody's not able to do that, you know, But that is also one of the reasons why I made I created my own business. I didn't want to have to answer to nobody about none of my stuff. And I wanted to be able to create an environment for people like me, right? Like, I think like maybe 75% of my staff is queer, you know, or some level on the spectrum. And I thought about how awesome that was, right? That I was able to create a space for minority people who are queer and to be able to, you know, to be able to serve and be able to do their jobs and do what it is that they want to do in the world and show up and be, you know, themselves. So
I think Courtney has her hand up, and I was going to chime in too, but I'll let Courtney go first.
I was clapping. You can go ahead.
I was just a real quick ad. I was sitting here, and as I'm listening to everybody talk, from Dr. Fowlkes posing the question about professionalism to everybody chiming in, and I just sit here and I am just like sitting here in my privilege. You know, I fired my job 4 years ago and never looked back. The only thing I did that I even had to answer to was I was an adjunct professor, and I fired them too now. So like, I don't have anybody to answer to. And I tend to use the things that I've been through in this evolving of myself as I've gotten older and life continues to happen. I share my story with the world. So I write about my life. And to be honest, from a professional standpoint, it's only made my reputation as a professional or my credibility as a professional just better, that I don't try to fit into the thought process of what and how a therapist is supposed to show up. And then the fact that I'm a sex therapist, it all just like completely marries itself, that all of these things are manifesting now in my personal life. And then professionally, this has been the arena I've sat in for over 19 years, if that makes sense. So for me, I sit here and I'm humbled by the privilege that I have. And I want that for so many other people. Like, I want so many other people to be able to experience how great it is to be able to show up authentically in the world and not have a care about how someone else responds. If someone doesn't want to see me as a therapist because of a podcast I did or a book I wrote or a statement they saw me post, then I don't want them to be my client anyway. They wouldn't be a good fit for me. I don't see it as a loss. I see it as there's somebody else that's out there that's a better fit for you. So for me, the last few years, I've really been coming into myself, right? And being able to accept every single aspect, every single change, and just embrace it with ease and with authenticity. And I really don't, you know, the only people that really matter to me are my kids. And I raised some really sex positive children. So when I had to tell them I was poly, and when I had to tell them I had a trans partner, when I told them I had a female partner, they were like, so like, their response is got to go in a book someday. They were so great. And when I look at them, it's a reflection that I know I did something right in the world. And that's all.
Oh, this is Kaylin. Oh my gosh. Okay, Chastity. Oh my gosh. I love everything that you've said. And as I'm sitting here and reflecting, I want us to literally realize what each one of us have done. We have said no to the box. We have said no to what they are thinking, what they say we have to do, what they think we have to think or be or whatever. And we've said no because we have to our authentic life. And what means the most to us is that we live in our own authenticity, and all of us have created this beautiful space. We hold space for everyone else that comes in connection with us to be in their authentic space. And that's what this is about. We are not meant to be somebody else. We were meant to be only who we are. And if we're gay, if we're trans, if we're straight, if we're queer, it doesn't matter, right? Because what matters is that we live true to who we are. And that for those of us who have made this deeply conscious choice to create and hold this space for LGBTQ and all the alphabet that goes beyond it, yes, we say yes, we say yes, we say yes over and over again. And so as everyone's talking, I'm like, they've got their own practice. They've got their own practice. What are they doing? They're holding space for that, for those clients. They're holding space for this community. They're holding space here. And that's what we're all about. That right there is the essence of Fowlkes Consulting. It's the essence of what each therapist here is doing, what each counselor is doing, what each doctor or I'm a life coach. We're all doing it. We're all doing it. So I'm just saying, I'm applauding you all because we've all said no. We've all fired everybody else. We're saying no. It's just about me and knowing that my purpose is to serve. My purpose is to be and hold that space for those who are finding their way. And I'm just applauding all of us. I'm just saying, I'm just so grateful for all of us and the work that we're all consciously choosing to do. Thanks.
Yeah, so I do want to be mindful of time. There's so many things I want to say but we only have 3 minutes to save the world. So I can't say all the things I'd like to say. I do want to thank Chastity and Courtney very much for coming and joining us for this conversation. And I would like to thank Chastity and Courtney and Chanel for bringing up what I think is a very important topic that we don't have time to talk about, which is erasure and the fact that, even within the LGBTQ+ community, it is very possible to be erased or to feel invisible. I think that's a really important conversation, and maybe that's a conversation we can have on another broadcast of Folks and Friends. I think about, even you were talking about passing, Chanel, and another word for it is stealth. And I think about how some people are fortunate enough to be stealth, right? But how even that's an artifact of privilege a lot of times. Right? It's, do you have access? Do you have means? So anyways, we'll have to have that conversation, at some point. Erasure versus stealth, right? And I hope that you guys will join us for that conversation when we have it. Thank you everyone so much for coming and having this conversation. I think that this will be posted on the SDIG YouTube channel. And if you are interested in reaching out to us in the future, you can always go to folksconsulting.com, or you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, any of the other consultants on LinkedIn. We're all pretty accessible. Thank you so much. And if no one else has anything to say, then we will call it a night, and we will bow out gracefully. Is there anyone that wants to say anything before we?
Well, I want to say thank you to all of you. I indeed like the discussion, and I want and hope that we continue this discussion, because the impediment for all the terrible things that are happening to, whether it's individuals or groups, is because of lack of open engagement, ignorant, and all those things combined to be shaping a terrible world. I think it would take people like you to be tackling these issues of our time to move us in the right direction. So I really appreciate each and every one of you.